Hey everyone, this is Kerim Baran of SolarAcademy. I am here today with Alex Shore of GridVest. GridVest is coming to my radar in the past year or so, thanks to really Nico Johnson of Suncast. And Alex is doing something really unique in the battery storage market and also has a pretty unique background himself. So I wanted to talk to him about his journey into this market and into what he does with GridVest, which is really battery and storage procurement made simple. And we'll talk about that. So Alex, welcome. Thank you for making the time. Um, tell
Yeah,
us a
thank
little bit about, yeah, tell us a little bit about how your career started, or if you want, go further back. Your journey in this world, and I know you spent some time in China as well. I can pull up your very interesting LinkedIn while you talk about your background, and let's then talk a little bit about how you ended up at GridVest and you're doing what you're doing right now.
Great. Well, really appreciate you having me on. This is awesome to be here. I love what you're doing at Solar Academy. And yeah, so I've definitely spent a bit of time all over the world, in particular China, where I spent 9 years. I started a
Yeah.
business called Cedar Clean Energy. And we were basically the first company in China to do solar PPAs for commercial buildings. So
Wow.
before that, I started a company there called E8, as you'll see in China. That was my first company, and we were more of a market entry consultant. We're bringing clean tech companies to China, and then out of that in 2013, saw that solar energy was going to be the one that basically was the biggest opportunity. Mostly
Yeah.
because it was the easiest to finance, because you could finance generation of energy much more easily than you could finance savings of energy through like ESCO type energy management system contracts. So
Yeah.
that's how Cedar began. E8 and then Cedar, those were both my first two companies I started in 2011 and then 2013. And then I ran Cedar basically until 2020, and or really till 2018, and then I took a little bit of a pivot. But I got to ride I feel like I coined the term solar coaster, but who knows? Because I was really,
Mhm.
I think China had it first before the US in terms of the ups and the downs and all of the wild ride that we were on over there. In particular, because it was so driven by subsidies and government directives that very much could move the market even more quickly and more holistically than what happens in the West. And so
See,
basically there was
which one of these is Cedar on your
go
LinkedIn
up
page?
higher. It's higher up. You passed it.
Oh,
It's further up. It's just because I think it's still technically it's part of, I mean, you have it in the present. Keep going. There you go.
oh, this one. Yeah,
There you
very
go,
good.
right
Yeah,
there, co-founder and
yeah,
CEO.
yeah.
So
That's still going, obviously. Yeah,
it is
yeah.
still going. Yeah, we're, basically since COVID, it's been in much more of go slow mode. And since COVID,
Mhm.
basically, I came back to the US, and that's when I started kind of conversations around what does the future look like in the US in terms of renewables. And battery storage
Right.
was the one that obviously caught my eye. And
Mhm.
through some conversations with well, who was a friend of mine, who's now become a business partner, David Quint, we basically realized that there's a big opportunity for battery storage in the future. And his background is all lending. So he's an asset-based lender. He spent 30 years in the mortgage lending business, and then he's had a few successful investments since then. And so we basically teamed up. He, with his asset-based lending experience and my renewable energy experience and my network in China, for
Yeah.
sourcing and just logistics and speaking some Chinese, we basically realized there was a big need for making battery storage equipment more accessible in the U.S., both from a cost perspective, but also from a logistics perspective, and lastly from a financing perspective. So we realized
Right.
battery equipment is so high, it's so expensive relative to the cost of a solar and storage project, where the cost solar used to be like that, where the solar panels used to be such a high percentage of the cost of the project. Obviously,
Right.
modules come down so much that now they're not. And the big challenge, the big hardware item is a battery system, or in particular the
Right
DC
now.
block,
Yeah.
which is really what is the asset we're underwriting when we provide financing for a project or flexible payment options. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I got into GridVest and how I came back to the US and during COVID. And yeah, we're really excited to be doing what we're doing here,
Yeah.
and happy to chat with you more about it today.
Yeah. Curious side conversation here. How did you end up in China? Like, what made you go to China in the first place? Or were you studying Eastern cultures or languages in college, or was there?
No, it was more. I traveled a lot in college, all over the world. I studied abroad in Italy and Africa, and just I traveled a lot when I was younger. And then
Yeah.
did my 2 years in Boston at State Street Bank in the in finance and structured finance. And I was after that, I was like, okay, if I can go anywhere in the world to work, I knew I wanted to work at something in energy, clean energy related. And I just
Yeah.
basically like if I could go anywhere in the world, where would I go? And I did a lot of research. And China was the place that was investing the most in renewables. They had just come
Yeah.
out with their 12th five-year plan and I was just blown away with the amount of focus on improving their environment. And also at that
Yeah.
time, how bad the environment actually was. Like the reading about the air
Yeah.
pollution and things like that was just like, wow, this is wild. And I had two friends who were living there and they were telling me all about the exciting things happening. And so I got on a plane, went for 6 weeks, what I thought it would be 6 weeks. And after about 3 weeks, I canceled my return flight and decided this is where I want to be. So
And
didn't
you
plan
ended up
to stay
staying
as long as I
for
did, but
how many years?
9 years. Yeah,
Nine
2011 to
years.
2020. And COVID,
Wow.
if it wasn't for COVID, I might still be there, honestly. I got kind of locked out of China. I was traveling for vacation. I went to on vacation to New Zealand and I couldn't get back in. That was because I left January and was supposed to come back in February. And at that point, all the
Okay.
flights were canceled back into China because at that point, COVID was mostly there.
Yeah.
And I came
Yeah.
back to the US. And then, of course, a week after I arrived in the US, COVID was we were on full lockdown in
Yeah.
San Francisco.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was fun.
Wow. Okay. All right. Moving on. So tell us a little bit about what GridVest does right now in the U.S. market. Who are its customers? Who does who does GridVest serve in the market, and how? And then let's dive further after that.
Great. Yeah, so GridVest is really focused on how we start is really focused on the commercial and industrial segment of battery storage. And so kind of
Mhm.
behind the meter projects for commercial buildings, industrial buildings, factories, warehouses, things like that. And so that's this kind of anywhere from like 40 kilowatt hours all the way to, 4 megawatt hours, let's say.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of started as our sweet spot because we felt like no one was serving that market. There was plenty of residential solutions available and there's
Yeah.
quite a lot of utility scale solutions out there as well.
Yeah.
And if you're buying
Yeah.
utility scale, you're probably going to buy direct from a supplier. If you're buying residential, you're probably going to buy from one of the traditional distributors. So pretty
Yeah.
simple, but no one was serving this middle market, this C&I
Right.
segment behind the meter because it's a very it's still a custom build or a custom spec when it comes to a project. You can't just,
Yeah.
pull something off the shelf and hope it works. You got to have the right battery and the right inverter and the right energy management system. And then there's a big question about, are you doing off grid or are you doing, microgrid? Are you doing just economic savings only? And there's a
Yeah.
lot of nuance there. Although it's actually a lot harder to design a commercial and industrial scale battery storage system, like let's say of 1 megawatt hour, than it is of a 100 megawatt hour utility scale project, because that's pretty much doing one thing in the middle of nowhere, and it's much more straightforward when it comes to the actual design and engineering. So yeah, so that's where we started, and we realized that our customers, who are mostly EPCs and developers who are installing renewable energy projects, they just capital and cash flow is always a challenge. And
Yeah.
so a lot of traditional banks and financing entities are not serving customers of that scale and of that type. And so we realized that, hey, we like batteries as an asset. And
Right.
we've got really great relationships with suppliers and manufacturers of these systems. And we know a lot of developers and EPCs who would love batteries, but not have to put up so much capital up front and need help figuring out what's the right system select size and selection. And they probably don't want to sign 3 or 4 different contracts with a battery manufacturer, an inverter manufacturer, an energy management solution. So we basically said, we don't want to provide a full turnkey solution where we're installing the whole thing. Like that's a project company, and there's plenty of project companies out there. We wanted to still be a product focused company, but to do it in a way where we are still providing a full solution, where it's helping these developers and EPCs to build battery storage in an easier way without the financial burdens, navigating all the cultural differences of sourcing from overseas when needed. And yeah, so that's kind of where GridVest, how it emerged and who we're serving.
So you're almost like a project development company doing that hardcore technical solution and procurement of the various components of that technical solution, but you don't really own and operate the project. You're really the expert in procuring the pieces of the solution, putting it together with various technical services, and you provide financing um, for the early stage of that project development process, I guess, is one way to to name what you're doing. Does that include like, so that would that be like construction financing you're providing for the whole project,
More of almost
or
like a
just it?
bridge financing. We're almost like pre-construction financing.
Yeah,
Typically, if you're going to get construction financing, then that would be after you start the construction, right? We're actually almost
yeah,
before that,
right.
helping you
So
get
they
the
take
equipment
the
lined up.
construction finance guys would pay down your financing essentially that
Exactly.
you're initiating. Got it. Got it.
Exactly.
Makes
And
sense.
so one of the, nice things is that we're not like a traditional underwriter or lender where we're going to do a crazy amount of due diligence and looking at your credit and all that. We do care about who you are, but we basically are looking at the asset, the batteries as an asset, and we want to know where they are and that they're a good asset. So for
Yeah,
us, much more flexible in the kinds of companies that can get access to credit. Most developers and EPCs, frankly, don't have the ability to get credit from a bank or financing institution
yeah,
because you need to have strong balance sheet or different kinds of, longer term history or, things like that. We're just looking at, hey, what's your track record? What's this project look like? And where that battery is going to be. And
yeah.
yeah, so
Got it.
hopefully it's a lot easier and so we can move a lot more quickly and we can be more nimble in
Yeah,
terms of matching what kind of terms they might need for making this project work. Because don't forget that a lot of the subsidies, for example, in California, SGIP, the
mhm,
subsidy for California battery storage projects and renewable energy projects, that you don't get paid that until after the first year of operation. So you get
right.
50% after year one. So most people in California need some capital to get through that point. Or,
Yeah,
for tax equity folks, they don't get their tax equity until after the project's completed as well. So there's always
yeah,
this gap between, or if they're just an EPC who's a kind of a gun for hire, they typically don't get a large majority of their payment until after the project's completed.
yeah. So do you finance the PC labor too, or
So
just
we're not
the
financing the labor at this point. It's something we
yeah,
might consider
yeah,
in the future, but we're really focusing more on the equipment, the
on the
battery
equipment?
itself, the inverter, even the EMS, which again is not totally always equipment. We're willing to finance that as part of a full package so that you can
Yeah,
bundle essentially an entire solution. The construction, obviously, and the EPC part, that's separate, but oftentimes our customers are doing the EPC work. So that's not
yeah,
as big of a challenge for them. Or if they're a developer who's outsourcing the EPC, they typically already have their EPC partners that they've worked with in the past. So that's
yeah.
not really something we've gotten requests for very often either.
So let's talk a little bit about your technology partners that you provide these solutions around. You have a number of key brands here. These are obviously optimized for various different sizes of solutions. Can you tell us a little bit about how you go about picking these solutions and matching them to the market opportunities?
Totally.
And
Yeah. So right now, we started with SYL and slash Ryzen as their parent
mhm,
company as one of our go-to solution providers because we felt like they're the best all-around value
mhm,
that we work of all the companies we work with. They have a very good price. They integrate typically CATL battery cells, so it's a very high quality product. And they were able to provide an additional level of hands-on support when it comes to the technical needs when it comes to integration needs and when it
mhm,
comes to kind of just customer service. And so that's what we work with them for our small and medium-sized projects because
mhm.
they have that ability to be an extra level of support.
Yep.
And so that's one example. If you scroll up a little bit there, we can see there, our other for larger projects, we'll work with CATL. So they have a great,
Mhm.
obviously make a great product.
Yeah,
Challenge working with them is they have a pretty high minimum order quantity. So they
yeah,
make sense more for larger projects, like something around,
yeah,
above, let's say 4 MWh.
yeah,
And they have a range of solutions from their Enter One Plus cabinets to Enter C Plus and Enter X containers. And
yeah,
obviously, they're the biggest and I think the highest quality battery manufacturer in the world. And so you're getting a product directly from them and obviously many different sizes. And we pair them with different inverters from Dynapower to Delta to EPC Power, depending on what's needed and what the application sizes are. And then next here, as you were just showing there on your screen, RCT Power. I think
mhm,
you were just passed by there. That one's a nice solution because it's a European company. They are basically building an all-in-one solution. They've got two main sizes. One is a 233 kilowatt hour building block, and then the larger, which you're seeing there, is the 933
mhm,
kilowatt hour block. And
yeah,
built into that inverter, this one has a 500 kilowatt inverter. The other has 100 kilowatt inverter. So they're a
mhm,
great solution for spaces that are space constrained because they're very
mhm,
dense in terms of their footprint. The installation is very easy since it's already built in together, battery and inverter. They've got a lot of the required certifications, both on the UL side, but on the right list for SGIP and for CEC in California and a few other states as well. So we like them and they've got a great support team as well. And then lastly, our kind of other go-to provider is SolarArc, which is the first
mhm,
battery on
yeah,
the page. They are
mhm,
go down one from there. There you go. And so they are I think everyone knows them, US based company. They make a really good product. They have a lot of good customer service support, and they integrate their inverters have the ability to do DC coupling, to integrate with a generator. They have a built-in controller, so it's kind of like for smaller projects, it really makes it easier. Instead of
yeah.
trying to build a whole um, custom solution, you really have this kit which already has all the pieces you need. And so we like SolarArc a lot for those kind of projects.
Yeah. And how do you handle the logistics of all this? So, do you have warehouses in the US or are you sourcing from China direct?
Yeah.
Um,
So typically what we do is we'll source either from the manufacturer directly. So, for the Chinese companies, we'll source direct and we'll drop ship it to the site. We do have warehouse
all the way,
partners.
would that be all the way from China, or would these companies have warehouses in the US as well?
Those would be all the way from China because that's the thing
Okay,
about CNI is it's not something you can stock the product.
right.
No one,
Yeah,
no one
yeah,
really stocks CNI product because A, high voltage batteries degrade. So you don't want
yeah,
to be holding on to a battery that's degrading. And B, they're big and they're expensive enough, right? In the
yeah,
range of let's say 100 to $300,000 a piece or more per block or
yeah,
something. To basically say, hey, I'm not going to spec order build a lot of these or ship them across the ocean, pay
yeah,
all these tariffs, and then hope that maybe we can sell it. So really, no one
yeah,
stores them. What we are doing is we have warehouse partners in LA, and basically we'll order them in advance of a customer's need. We can store them for some period of time, especially now with potentially new tariffs coming. That's another thing we're doing is
yeah,
trying to get ahead of that. And
right.
we are planning to stock some equipment for some of the smaller projects and smaller systems
Yeah,
for folks like RCT Power and SolarArc. But yeah, we think that that approach is the best way to basically make sure you're getting the right product. And that allows us to line up the timeline of these projects because oftentimes there's still a 4 to 6 month lead time before any of these
yeah,
projects are even ready to have batteries received on site. They need to have the pads poured, they need to have all the permits in place, they need to have all the infrastructure ready to go. And one thing that is unique is we can also help speed up the lead times. So because we have MSAs and we have really good relationships with our suppliers, we can usually get product more quickly than anyone else in the market. And oftentimes, we've already kind of pre-allocated some of that inventory for us. So That's another benefit is we can speed that process up and again ultimately help manage if there's a delay on site. We can say, okay, sure, we're happy to store that equipment for a few months or whatever until you might need it. And so that is kind of like this the ultimate flexibility, which is why we call ourselves, different kind of battery storage solution provider, or, some people use the word distributor. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer for what we do because we're not a
Yeah.
traditional distributor, but we do obviously, resell battery storage solutions. So in a sense, what we are.
Got it. And let's talk a little bit about the pricing too, because obviously people can buy these solutions from a turnkey provider. And what's the benefit of them buying it with you guys, and how are you priced vis-a-vis those kinds of players versus large major battery manufacturers? And yeah, like
Yeah, I
what is
mean,
that?
yeah, there's how I look at it, there's really, three main approaches in this segment, right? There's, you can go to a traditional distributor that's just going to sell you the kind of parts. You can go to a turnkey provider that's going to do the whole thing end to end.
Yeah,
We're coming in the middle there, and we're trying to make
yeah,
it so that you can get a turnkey-like experience with a full solution and a full system, but without necessarily the turnkey price. Because
right,
oftentimes, we can come in almost sometimes half as much as a turnkey provider. And that's
yeah,
because we're not doing the installation, so we're not doing the EPC work, but
yeah,
B, we're providing is, we're able to operate on a much lower margin than a lot of these other players are.
yeah,
And we can still help you kind of support you like we're a turnkey provider in terms of getting technical support, getting technical questions answered, helping with warranty claims,
yeah,
anything that might come up in the battery procurement or development process or deployment process even. And then we have
yeah,
good partners who we can recommend for operation and maintenance if that's something that is of interest. And so again, we're trying to be this kind of in-between solution where it's almost turnkey, but not totally turnkey. And,
yeah,
and more full service than a maybe traditional distributor. And going
yeah,
direct and versus going direct, I think, frankly, most of these manufacturers aren't going to deal with you unless you're a large enough buyer. And even if you are a large enough buyer, I think the headaches of signing multiple contracts, negotiating contracts in Chinese, dealing with the time zone dynamics, um, going to visit the factories, doing the quality assurance, doing the
yeah,
factory
yeah,
testing, it's just a lot for a
yeah.
developer or a
You might as
one.
well be one of the major developers at that point. So
Exactly.
then we were talking about the cost structure prior to this call. You and I were talking about the cost structure of what like the cost ratio is between the full battery stacks and then the brains of the system, the EMS and the CF, the energy management system, the control system, the software. And you were saying that usually that control system is anywhere from a third to 20% of the full price. So
Yeah.
if we do look at the labor component of this, because you mentioned earlier in this conversation that solar panels used to be like they used to be more than 50% of the total solar solution cost if you go back 12
Exactly.
years. And now they're like 30 cents when people are selling solutions for a buck or $2 or even higher,
Exactly.
$3 a watt and even higher. So they've got to be a very small percentage of the cost. Uh, uh, Obviously, the same thing is going to happen to the batteries. But right now, in this time, what does that ratio look like vis-a-vis labor for installing one of these? I don't know, call it 200 kilowatt hour system or 2 megawatt hour system. Like
Yeah, I
it,
mean, I think so. Like you pointed out, the ratio, let's say right now of the battery storage, the battery versus the battery storage project overall, it's like 65 to 80% of the cost of the project is going to be the battery versus the other parts of the equipment. Obviously, that's not factoring in the EPC part. The EPC part can be about half, if you look at the overall cost, about half the cost.
about half.
But
Okay, so yeah,
yeah,
got it.
batteries are definitely the biggest ticket item. And again, they're the ones that are most, I'd say, sensitive in the sense that they degrade, right? You can store a bunch of inverters in a warehouse and it's fine. You can't really store a bunch of batteries in a warehouse without a lot of
Mm.
cost and maintenance and potential degradation of those batteries. So, and also on top of that, a lot of warehouses have restrictions around what storing lithium ion batteries and
Well,
things like that.
what's the
So,
best way? I mean, on that storage point, I do have, as you know, I do have a hobby of remote control toys, and the batteries of those, they suggest storing them at around 50% full charge for them to last the longest. How does that play into lithium industrial size batteries? What's the best way to store them for long periods? Do you want to fill them up and discharge them, cycle them? Like, what is,
yeah,
I
no, I
mean,
mean it's pretty much the same, right? I mean, you want to store them in the range of a little lower than 50%, probably 20 to 35% in the terms of for longer term storage. And
mhm,
then yeah, you want to cycle them at least once a year at a minimum. I think like twice a year is usually ideal. Otherwise, the
mhm,
cell balances start getting out of whack, and then
yeah,
you have headaches when it comes to commissioning the system. You'll have to charge and discharge it many times before you get those cell balances and tolerances back into whack. Obviously, the better quality the cell, the less issue you're going to have with that. Again, that's why we really specialize and focus on tier one suppliers because right now, I've gotten some people have shown me some really hilarious looking quotes when I see, they go on like Alibaba and they get some battery quote and it's like, see, well, why isn't it your product this cheap? I'm like, well, that's a different product. Like, and I think people just have to remember that
yeah,
all LFP or all lithium ion batteries are not considered the same. And there's tier one suppliers are tier one for a reason. And so especially with, the challenges we've seen with battery fires lately. And I think that quality has never been more important. In addition to there's the longevity and the degradation and the, challenges of warrantying and things like that. To me, you're going to have a much better, safer, and you know, frankly, just more pleasant experience if you stick with tier one suppliers who have enough gigawatt hours deployed that they have really, really good data. They know exactly how to maintain their cells and their systems, and are going to be there when if there ever was a problem. And I think that's pretty straightforward. And so anyway, that just a little side caveat that I think people sometimes want to cheap out on because there are low cost battery solutions out there. But I think,
yeah,
I've almost always heard horror stories or seen horror stories when that happens. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, that's
Got it.
that's something.
Yeah,
And just to address too, probably something that you may ask, and I think people at home might be asking, is what is going to happen with U.S. based manufacturing of battery storage?
yeah,
Uh, and I think it's a really interesting one, right? LFP, lithium iron phosphate in the US, the primary lithium ion technology has really, although it was invented in the US never really uh, invested in that infrastructure and that manufacturing capability, just much like what happened with solar modules. And so obviously at this point they're at quite a disadvantage from an efficiency perspective compared to China and other countries that have had that infrastructure built up. But
yeah, yeah.
obviously with the current administration, I think there is going to be a push for both Chinese suppliers and other, domestically homegrown manufacturers to come set up manufacturing in the US. And so I think my best guess is by 2027, there will be a meaningful amount of US based LFP manufacturing where maybe it will
Mhm,
start to actually be able to source US solutions. But I think in the
yeah,
meantime, the interim is going to be, Chinese cells that are integrated in the US into a cabinet or container by a US based company. That will probably be the interim solution. But the
yeah,
problem is there when you look at the costs, you're still way off when it comes to what it costs to source a battery from China, even with the tariffs, and what it is to source the cells and then integrate here at the current U.S. labor costs. And
yeah,
then you're still not necessarily getting a higher quality product. So it's a tough one to solve, but I do hope, to see U.S. becoming more of a dominant player in the manufacturing of LFP and eventually leapfrogging to the next technology, which is probably going to be sodium ion or maybe a solid state technology. And
How
so
long
that's
to that do you think?
I
Yeah,
think 3 to 5. My best guess, is 3 to 5 years before it
really?
becomes economic. I think right now
Yeah,
the that I've seen are either on some technologies it's power density, on others it's about the life cycle, like how many cycles can you get out of that battery. And much like a lot of other renewable energy technologies, like for example, competing solar PV technologies, it even if you have a better technology, it takes so long to get the supply chains to be at the scale that they are at that the economics are really hard to compete on. So I think eventually LFP will get disrupted, but it's going to take some time before you can dethrone that technology, which has now become the dominant player for not only stationary storage, but now electric vehicles as well.
yeah. I mean, all the reports I'm reading right now saying there's not enough lithium in the world to enable the future that you and I were discussing prior to this call, which is a mostly solar plus battery world and EVs, mostly EVs as well. There's gonna be a ton of need for storage in in
Exactly.
that in that future. Um, so let's finish off with talking about some of your types of projects. Like where are you seeing a lot of demand? How is the future looking for GridVest? Where are you seeing opportunities in the market? Um, and yeah, a little bit of like what you see in the next 1 to 2 years for GridVest and its market and customers.
Yeah, great. Happy to answer that. And thanks for the question. It's a good one. I think that right now, most of our customers have been commercial and industrial customers, as I mentioned. So we started with schools. We've done a number of schools in Southern California, which they had already had solar on their roof, and now that our customer is a developer of this project, but they are deploying battery storage now to increase their utilization of the solar so they can use it, not just during the day, but also after hours. And so they can reduce their demand charges and really mostly for economic savings. But there also is a critical backup power component where, they want to have the ability to have backup power and be a community resilience center, basically, in the event of a power outage. So that's a really important one because, yeah, I mean, everyone, the increasing nature of our electric grid and our changing in climate is that there's going to be more power outages. And
Yeah,
so that's a great use case. We're working with a brewery that wants to add in EV charging. So, EV charging is tough right now because if you add in EV charging, it can really easily and quickly spike your demand charges. And
yeah,
so EV charging gets very expensive on top of the fact that you may not even be able to increase your AC capacity or, with the utility to even have the
yeah. Put the
capacity
EV
for
charger.
very much EV charging. So that's another great use case of battery storage is it can help you level out that demand of electricity for EV charging. And help you reduce your time of use. So like maybe if you're charging at 4 to 9 p.m., you can be powering that from a battery instead of pulling that from the grid, which is in
Yeah,
California the most
that's
expensive time. Other use cases, we're working on some projects in Texas, which are for off-grid applications. We also have a few projects in Texas that are utility scale. So there's 10 megawatt, 40 megawatt hour projects that's the kind of a common size in Texas. Anything below 10 megawatts is much easier to get permitted. And
yeah,
so a lot of people who have land and they see that there's huge economic opportunity. And so Texas is the fastest growing storage market in the US for sure. And because it's much easier to get projects deployed. And so that's become an interesting angle for us. We didn't really think originally we were going to be focused on that smaller utility scale market, but actually we've seen a huge need in companies for good solutions and sourcing and managing the logistics of those projects. And so and that's where our financing really becomes valuable because that's a big upfront cost if you're talking about 40 megawatt hours, right? That could be
yeah,
several million dollars. And it's hard, up to like $10 million for a project potentially. And it's hard to come up with that kind of capital upfront for a lot of these developers who are relying on construction financing or sale leaseback arrangements or other kinds of creative structures to build these projects. So,
Uh,
was there a second part to your question that I didn't answer?
yeah, like what do you see in the future? Like, are you seeing a lot of activity behind the meter now, and do you see more in front of the meter? Are you seeing a world where maybe every property will have a battery one day, and what is that going to look like? Do you
Yeah, I
think?
mean, I think the future is very much storage is going to drive everything, right? Especially it's starting with right now at the top with data centers. So data centers are the biggest power, demand increase. I
Yeah,
think in 2024 there was a 2% uh, increase in power usage in the US,
yeah,
most of that driven by data centers and EVs.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think that's where it starts is like, how do you power these massive facilities? Also, then it's not just about providing the actual electrons, it's supporting the grid similar to EV charging, data centers also aren't able to get the grid capacity they need. So we've talked to
yeah,
some developers who are doing 200 megawatt hour projects at data centers just to provide that additional power load that's needed when the servers
yeah,
kick on and there's a huge spike and then the servers kick
yeah,
off and the GPUs for these AI models are really energy intensive and the spikes are very high.
yeah,
So that's where it starts. But I think where it goes is, everyone I think in California right now, especially after the fires in LA, are thinking about how do I be a little more resilient, right? In the event of a power outage, how do I make sure that my house or my can stay on, the electricity can stay on, and the systems I have to either fight fires or keep myself safe, can also stay on and monitor your house remotely and all of that. And so I think it starts with individuals realizing how vulnerable they are to power outages. I mean, my
yeah,
sister lives in New York, and if you lose power in the winter in New York, like you're really in a tough spot. And you might not have, you're lucky if you have gas, frankly, because then you at least can have heat. But so many people have electrified now that everything's electric, and so um, there's a real challenge there. But then as you go in the building level, economic opportunities are the first thing that people are looking at, right? With demand charges going really wild for commercial buildings and time of use pricing being more widely deployed across the US, there's a huge economic arbitrage opportunity. But then
no doubt.
people start looking at what's the value of resilience and how much can I save if I can keep the lights on during a power outage for my business. And so that starts to becoming an interesting calculation that more people are starting to look at. And lastly, I think the part that's really exciting is starting to look at these full systems, right? Where I've talked to some warehouse developers that are actually looking at going full off grid, where they actually don't want to they're looking at how much it's going to cost them to have the utility come out and connect their AC line. And they're saying, wait, we don't use that much power because we're a warehouse. What if we just put solar on the roof and had batteries and we could basically be our own utility and we won't have to pay that upfront fee and we won't have a utility bill each month and we can have a third party pay for it and we can sign a PPA. So
Yeah,
it's kind of a no-brainer for a lot of these developers as the battery technology gets cheaper, solar continues to get cheaper, and the
yeah,
potential for basically being running your own grid and also having the next level is community level microgrid where you're able to actually have a community-based solution that connects multiple battery storage and solar systems together in a way that you can actually have more community resilience. And there's a great project in Northern California, the Redwood Coast basically microgrid, which is where there's a military base, there's an airport, there's a city that was having a lot of, or a town that was having a lot of blackouts and power outages due to the PSPS events, the preventative power safety shutoffs. And so through a consortium of people, they funded a microgrid development there. Now they're basically producing more power than they're using, and they have full ability to run a microgrid independent of the main grid for I believe it's like a day or a day and a half. I can't recall exactly, potentially longer. And it's a great example of what I think the future of our utility looks like and of our energy resilience. And so I'm excited to see battery storage become more widely utilized. and to pair it with other technologies that will help to balance the grid. And I think chemical batteries are just one of many kinds of storage solutions that are coming, from kinetic energy to gravity energy storage to thermal energy storage like heat batteries. So it's for sure the most widely utilized and easiest to deploy right now. But I think that plus all these other new technologies get me excited to think of a more resilient grid network and a more sustainable one.
Great. Alex, this was an amazing wealth of knowledge for our viewers to learn about batteries, especially in that mid-tier segment, the CNI, bigger than residential and smaller than the largest utilities. Sounds like you guys have a great position in the market to serve this need for this mid-tier storage need, which is only going to grow. And the products and the batteries and the solutions are most likely going to get cheaper and cheaper, and we will probably see tens, maybe hundreds of times more of these solutions in the market. And thank you again for sharing your knowledge and giving us a little education on this.
Yeah,
And
no problem. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I would love for any developers or EPCs or really anyone who's sourcing battery storage systems to reach out, and we'd be glad to help point you in the right direction and give you some of our learnings and potentially help source equipment and provide financing. So thanks again for having me, and look forward to continuing and following your journey with SolarAcademy and seeing all the great content you're bringing to the world. So thank you.
we'll do more. Thanks, Alex.